Have you ever walked into your garden expecting to see beautiful, healthy tomatoes, only to find cracked fruit, yellowing leaves, weak growth, or plants that seem to be struggling no matter how much you water them? If that sounds familiar, the problem may not be your soil, fertilizer, or tomato variety. It could be something much simpler and much easier to overlook: the way you are watering your tomatoes. Welcome back to Fresh Homegrown Harvest, where we help you grow more food, make better use of your garden, and avoid the small mistakes that can quietly cost you an entire harvest. Today, we're talking about one of the most important parts of tomato care: watering. And more specifically, we're going to uncover the watering mistake that many gardeners make without realizing it. Because here's the surprising thing: tomatoes need plenty of water, but simply giving them more water isn't always the answer. In fact, watering too much, too little, too often, or at the wrong time can create a whole chain of problems that eventually show up in your leaves, roots, flowers, and fruit. The goal isn't to keep your tomato plants constantly soaked. The goal is to create consistent moisture around the roots while allowing the soil to drain properly and the foliage to stay as dry as possible. Once you understand that difference, watering becomes much easier. So if you have tomatoes growing right now, stay with me, because we're going to break down exactly how to water them, how to recognize watering problems, when to water, how deeply to water, what to do during hot weather, and how a simple change in your routine could make a major difference in your harvest. Let's start with the biggest mistake of all. The biggest tomato watering mistake. The mistake is shallow, inconsistent watering. Many gardeners walk outside, look at the soil surface, see that it looks dry, and immediately give the plant a small amount of water. The next day, the surface looks dry again, so they repeat the process. It feels like they're taking good care of the tomato plant because they're watering regularly. But there's a problem. Tomato plants don't just need wet soil at the very top. They need moisture available deeper in the root zone. When you only wet the surface, you're encouraging roots to remain close to the surface instead of developing a deeper, stronger root system. That can become especially problematic during hot weather. The top layer of soil can dry out quickly under strong sunlight and warm temperatures. If most of the plant's roots are concentrated near that surface, the plant can experience water stress surprisingly fast. This creates a cycle. The gardener sees the plant wilting, adds a little more water, the plant temporarily improves, and then the soil dries again. The gardener repeats the process. Instead of maintaining consistent moisture, they're constantly allowing the plant to swing between too dry and too wet. And tomatoes generally perform much better when their soil moisture is more consistent. Think of watering as building a reservoir around the roots rather than simply wetting the surface. When you water deeply, moisture moves farther down into the soil. The roots can access that moisture for a longer period of time, especially when mulch is helping slow evaporation. You don't necessarily need to water every day. In fact, depending on your soil, weather, container size, plant size, and growing conditions, watering every day may be completely unnecessary. What matters is what is happening around the roots. Why tomatoes are so sensitive to watering changes. Tomatoes are surprisingly productive plants. A single healthy plant can produce a large amount of fruit, but producing all of that fruit requires water. Water is involved in photosynthesis, nutrient movement, cell growth, and fruit development. That means the plant needs a reliable supply. But reliable doesn't mean unlimited. When the soil becomes extremely dry and then suddenly receives a large amount of water, the plant can go through a rapid change in water availability. If fruit is developing at the same time, that sudden change can contribute to problems such as fruit cracking. You've probably seen it before. A tomato looks almost perfect, and then suddenly you notice a split running across the skin. Sometimes the crack is small. Sometimes it becomes large enough to expose the inside of the fruit. There are several factors that can contribute to cracking, including variety, weather, temperature, and rapid changes in moisture. But inconsistent watering is one factor gardeners can often control. This is why consistency matters so much. Instead of letting your plants become severely dry and then trying to rescue them with a flood of water, aim to keep the root zone reasonably and consistently moist. That doesn't mean constantly wet. There should still be oxygen in the soil, and excess water needs to drain away. Healthy roots need both moisture and air. Don't judge the soil by the surface alone. Here's another common problem. Gardeners look at the surface of the soil and assume it tells the whole story. It doesn't. The top inch of soil can be dry, while the soil several inches below remains moist. This is especially common when you're using mulch. The surface may appear dry, but underneath the mulch, the soil can still hold plenty of moisture. So before watering, don't automatically react to what the very top of the soil looks like. Instead, check deeper. You can gently push a finger into the soil near the plant, away from the main stem. If the soil several inches down still feels reasonably moist, you may not need to water yet. For larger plants, you can also use a moisture meter, but you don't necessarily need expensive equipment. Your hands can tell you a lot when you learn how your soil behaves. The important thing is to check the actual root zone. And don't make the mistake of checking only one spot. If your garden receives uneven sunlight, one side of the bed may dry faster than another. Raised beds, containers, sandy soil, clay soil, and heavily mulched areas can all behave differently. Your garden is a living system, not a timer. Water deeply, not just frequently. When you do water your tomatoes, the goal should be to moisten the root zone thoroughly. A quick sprinkle may make the soil surface look wet, but it doesn't necessarily deliver enough water where the plant needs it. Deep watering encourages roots to explore a larger volume of soil. A larger root system can give the plant better access to moisture and nutrients and may help it cope with short periods of dry weather more effectively. But remember, deep watering doesn't mean creating a swamp. You want the water to move into the soil rather than running away across the surface. If your soil is very dry and water immediately runs off, slow down. Apply water gradually so it has time to soak into the soil rather than flowing away. This is particularly important with compacted soil or very dry garden beds. You may need to water, pause, and water again so the moisture can penetrate instead of simply flowing away. Water at the base of the plant. Now let's talk about where the water goes. One of the easiest improvements you can make is to direct water toward the soil around the roots rather than spraying the entire plant. Tomato leaves don't need to be soaked every time you water. In fact, repeatedly wetting the foliage can create conditions that favor certain fungal and bacterial diseases, particularly when the leaves remain wet for long periods. This doesn't mean that every drop of water touching a tomato leaf will cause disease. Rain happens. Morning dew happens. Garden conditions vary. But when you're intentionally watering, you can make a smart choice. Put the water where the plant needs it most, around the root zone. A watering can with a gentle flow, a hose used carefully, or a drip irrigation system can all work well. The actual method matters less than the principle. Water the soil. Try to keep the foliage as dry as practical. The best time of day to water. Timing can also make a difference. For most home gardens, early morning is an excellent time to water. Temperatures are usually cooler, the sun isn't yet at its strongest, and the plant has the day ahead to use the moisture. If some water does accidentally reach the foliage, morning gives the leaves more opportunity to dry. Late evening watering can be less desirable when it leaves tomato foliage wet overnight. Again, this doesn't mean an evening watering will automatically destroy your plants. If your tomato is desperately wilted and the only time you can water is evening, water it. Saving the plant is more important than following a perfect schedule. But if you have a choice, morning is often a practical option. The important thing is to avoid turning watering into a rigid rule that ignores what the plant and soil are actually telling you.
What about watering in hot weather? Hot weather changes everything. During a heat wave, your tomato plants may lose water much faster than they normally would. Large leaves can lose significant amounts of moisture through transpiration, and the soil can dry faster as well. This is where gardeners sometimes make another mistake. They see a wilted plant and immediately assume it needs a huge amount of water. Sometimes it does, but not every wilt is caused by the same problem. Plants can temporarily wilt during extreme heat even when the soil still contains moisture. That's why checking the soil is important. If the soil is dry several inches down, give the plant a thorough watering. If the soil is already moist but the plant is wilting during the hottest part of the day, don't automatically keep adding water. The plant may simply be responding to heat stress. If it recovers later in the evening or early morning, that tells you something important. During hot weather, mulch becomes one of your best friends. Mulch can change your watering routine. If you're growing tomatoes without mulch, you're often making your plants work harder than necessary. A good layer of organic mulch can help reduce evaporation from the soil surface, moderate soil temperature, and reduce how quickly moisture disappears. Materials such as clean straw, shredded leaves, grass clippings that are appropriate for garden use, or finished compost can be used depending on your situation. But don't pile mulch directly against the tomato stem. Leave a little space around the base. That helps keep the stem from staying constantly damp and reduces the chance of creating a cozy environment for problems. Mulch isn't just decoration, it is part of your watering strategy. Instead of constantly replacing moisture that evaporates from bare soil, you're helping the soil hold on to the water you've already provided. That can make an enormous difference during hot, dry periods. Container tomatoes are different. If you're growing tomatoes in containers, pay special attention. Container plants often dry out much faster than tomatoes growing in the ground. A large plant in a relatively small pot may have a surprisingly high water demand, especially during hot weather. This is where a watering schedule can be useful, but only as a starting point. Don't blindly water a container tomato every morning simply because that's what you did yesterday. Check the growing medium. Lift the container if it's manageable. Learn how heavy it feels when adequately watered compared with when it is dry. Over time, you'll become much better at recognizing when your container plants actually need water. And make sure the container has proper drainage. A pot without adequate drainage can turn a watering routine into a root problem. You may think you're helping the plant by giving it plenty of water, while the roots are actually sitting in an environment with too little oxygen. That can lead to weak growth and other problems. The danger of overwatering. Let's talk about the opposite mistake. Some gardeners are so afraid of underwatering that they keep their tomato plants constantly wet. More water must mean more growth, right? Not necessarily. Tomato roots need oxygen. When soil remains saturated for too long, the spaces that normally contain air can be filled with water. That can make it difficult for roots to function properly. Overwatering can also create conditions that favor root diseases. The plant may begin to look strangely unhealthy. Leaves can yellow, growth may become weak. The soil may remain wet for a long time, and the gardener may respond by adding even more water because the plant looks stressed. This creates a frustrating cycle. So remember this simple idea. A thirsty tomato needs water. A waterlogged tomato needs better drainage. Those are two very different problems. Yellow leaves don't always mean more water. If your tomato leaves are turning yellow, don't immediately reach for the hose. Yellowing can have many causes: nutrient issues, natural aging, disease, root problems, environmental stress, and watering problems can all play a role. Look at the entire plant. Are the newest leaves affected or the oldest? Is the soil constantly wet? Is the plant growing normally? Are the stems strong? Are flowers forming? Are the leaves showing spots or unusual patterns? Good gardening is about observing the whole plant rather than reacting to one symptom. The same yellow leaf can have completely different causes in different gardens. That's why understanding the environment is so important. Don't water on a strict calendar. One of the worst habits a gardener can develop is saying, "I water my tomatoes on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday." That might work sometimes, but plants don't live according to our calendars. Weather changes, rain changes, temperature changes, plant size changes, soil moisture changes. A tomato plant in cool, cloudy weather may need far less water than the same plant during a week of intense heat. Instead of thinking, today is watering day, think, does the root zone need water today? That small change in thinking can completely transform the way you care for your garden. Your schedule can remind you to check. It shouldn't replace observation. Rain changes everything. If it rains heavily, don't automatically water your tomatoes because your normal watering day has arrived. Check the soil. If the rain has thoroughly soaked the root zone, your plants may not need anything from you for several days. On the other hand, a short shower doesn't necessarily mean the soil is deeply watered. Sometimes the rain only wets the surface. This is why gardeners need to look beyond the weather report. Rainfall amount matters. Soil type matters. Mulch matters. Plant size matters, and drainage matters. Your garden can receive rain while the tomato root zone still needs attention, or receive heavy rain and require no additional water at all. Soil type matters more than many gardeners realize. Sandy soil drains quickly. Clay-heavy soil can hold water for much longer. Loamy soil often provides a useful balance, although even loam can vary considerably. This means two gardeners can grow identical tomato varieties in different locations and need completely different watering routines. If your soil drains very quickly, you may need to monitor moisture more frequently. If your soil holds water for a long time, you may need to water less frequently and focus more on improving drainage and soil structure. Adding organic matter over time can help improve soil structure, but avoid treating every garden as though it has the same watering needs. Your soil is part of your watering system. Learn how it behaves. Watering newly planted tomatoes. Newly transplanted tomatoes need special attention. Their root systems are smaller than those of established plants, and they're adjusting to their new environment. After transplanting, make sure the surrounding soil is adequately moist. But don't turn the planting hole into a permanent puddle. As the plant becomes established, gradually encourage it to develop a broader root system. This is another reason deep watering becomes increasingly valuable as the plant grows. You want the roots exploring the soil rather than remaining concentrated in a tiny pocket of permanently wet earth. What about flowering tomato plants? When tomatoes are flowering and setting fruit, consistent moisture becomes particularly important. This is an exciting stage because you're finally seeing the promise of your harvest. Tiny yellow flowers appear, then small green fruits begin forming, and suddenly you're checking the plants every day. This is exactly when you want to avoid extreme swings in soil moisture. A plant experiencing repeated severe drought followed by heavy watering can become stressed at a time when it is trying to produce fruit. Maintain steady moisture, keep feeding reasonable, protect the soil with mulch, and give the plant enough sunlight. Don't assume that pouring more water onto the plant will automatically produce more tomatoes. Healthy production comes from balance. Why cracked tomatoes happen? Few things are more frustrating than seeing a beautiful tomato crack just before you're ready to harvest it. Fruit cracking can happen for several reasons, but sudden changes in water availability are an important one to watch. Imagine the tomato plant has experienced dry conditions. Then a major rainstorm arrives. The plant suddenly has access to abundant water. The fruit can take up water rapidly, and the internal pressure can contribute to cracking, particularly when the skin can't expand quickly enough. You can't control every rainstorm. You can't control every temperature swing. But you can reduce unnecessary moisture fluctuations by keeping the root zone more consistently supplied with water. This is one of those simple gardening practices that may not look dramatic day to day, but can make a difference over the entire growing season. Watering and blossom end rot. Now we need to talk about blossom end rot. You may recognize it as a dark, sunken area that develops on the bottom of a tomato. It's often associated with calcium availability, but the bigger gardening lesson is that inconsistent water supply can interfere with the plant's ability to move calcium and water where they're needed. This doesn't mean you should simply dump calcium onto every tomato plant with blossom end rot. the underlying issue can be more complicated. Instead, focus on good growing conditions. Maintain consistent moisture, don't damage roots, don't over-fertilize, maintain appropriate soil conditions, and don't assume every calcium-related problem can be fixed by adding more calcium. Sometimes the better solution is improving how the entire system functions.
Don't water the stem directly. Here's another small adjustment. When watering tomatoes, avoid blasting the base of the stem with a powerful stream. Instead, water the soil around the plant. A strong jet of water can disturb soil, expose roots, and create unnecessary erosion. Gentle watering is better. Think of slowly soaking the root zone rather than attacking the plant with a hose. Your tomatoes don't need a pressure washer. They need moisture. A simple tomato watering routine. So what should your routine actually look like? Start by checking the soil. Don't assume. Feel the moisture below the surface. Then look at the weather. Has it rained? Is extreme heat coming? Is the forecast cool and cloudy? Next, consider the plant. Is it small? Is it mature? Is it loaded with fruit? Is it growing in a container? Then water thoroughly when the root zone actually needs it. Direct the water towards the soil. Give it enough time to soak in. Avoid unnecessary runoff. And after watering, check the soil again so you learn how much water your particular garden actually requires. This may sound like a lot at first, but after a few weeks, it becomes second nature. You begin to recognize the feel of your soil. You learn how quickly your garden dries. You understand how your mulch behaves, and you start watering based on observation rather than guesswork. Signs your tomato may need water. So what should you look for? Wilting is one obvious sign, but don't rely on wilting alone. Check the soil. Dry soil combined with wilting is a much stronger indication that the plant needs water. You may also notice leaves becoming less firm or the plant appearing generally stressed. But remember that temporary midday wilting during extreme heat doesn't always mean the soil is completely dry. This is why soil inspection is so important. Plants communicate with multiple signals. Your job is to put those signals together. Signs you may be overwatering. Now look at the opposite situation. If the soil remains wet for long periods, if water sits around the plant, if drainage is poor, or if the plant looks unhealthy despite constantly wet soil, you may be dealing with excess moisture. Don't respond by watering more. Instead, investigate drainage. Is the bed compacted? Is the container blocked? Is the soil holding too much water? Is the garden receiving more rain than usual? Sometimes the best watering improvement is actually reducing how much water you're adding. Drip irrigation can help. If you grow many tomatoes, drip irrigation can make watering much easier. A properly designed drip system delivers water slowly to the soil near the plants. It can reduce water wasted on areas that don't need it and keep foliage drier than overhead watering. But even with drip irrigation, don't simply install the system and forget about it. Check the soil, check the emitters, make sure they're functioning, and adjust your watering based on weather and plant needs. Automation is useful. Blind automation isn't. Don't forget the roots. It's easy to focus on what you can see: tomato leaves, tomato flowers, tomato fruit. But the most important part of the plant is hidden underground. Roots determine how efficiently the plant can access water and nutrients. If you're constantly flooding the soil, disturbing the roots, or allowing the soil to swing from extremely dry to completely saturated, you're making life harder for that hidden part of the plant. Think about the roots every time you water. You're not watering the leaves, you're not watering the tomatoes, you're watering the soil so the roots can do their job. That mindset alone can improve your gardening. Avoid watering every plant the same way. Another common mistake is treating every tomato plant identically. You might have one plant growing in full sun. Another could be partially shaded. One may be in a large raised bed. Another may be in a container. One might be heavily mulched. Another may have bare soil.
One plant might be huge and covered with fruit. Another might still be establishing itself. These plants don't necessarily have identical water requirements. Learn to manage them individually. Your garden doesn't need a perfect formula. It needs attention. What to do after heavy rain? After a major rainfall, take a walk through the garden. Look at the soil. Check whether water is pooling. Look at the leaves. Inspect the lower part of the plant. If the garden is muddy and saturated, resist the temptation to add more water. Instead, let excess moisture drain. If drainage is a recurring problem, consider improving the soil structure, raising the bed, redirecting water, or adjusting the location of future tomato plants. Sometimes watering problems are really site selection problems. Don't let a watering mistake discourage you. If you've been watering your tomatoes incorrectly, don't panic. Gardening is a learning process. Every season teaches you something. Maybe you watered too often. Maybe you waited too long. Maybe you watered the leaves instead of the soil. Maybe you didn't use mulch. Maybe you followed a schedule that worked last year but failed during this year's weather. That's okay. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is to notice what is happening and adjust. Your garden gives you feedback every day. You just have to pay attention. The simple rule to remember. If you remember only one thing from today's video, remember this: water deeply, water consistently, and water according to the soil, not the calendar. That's the heart of good tomato watering. Don't simply wet the surface. Don't keep the soil permanently saturated. Don't wait until the plant is severely stressed and then flood it. And don't assume every tomato needs exactly the same amount of water. Instead, check the root zone. Water thoroughly when needed. Use mulch to slow evaporation. Keep water directed toward the soil. And adjust your routine as weather and plant size change. Your tomatoes don't need perfection. Here's something every gardener needs to hear. Your tomatoes don't need perfect conditions every single day. They're tougher than they look. A brief dry period doesn't automatically mean your harvest is ruined. A rainy week doesn't automatically mean your plants will fail. A few cracked tomatoes don't mean you did everything wrong. Gardening is about managing conditions, not controlling every variable. You can't control the weather. You can't stop every disease. You can't prevent every pest. But you can improve the consistency of your watering. And sometimes one simple improvement is enough to noticeably improve your results. Think about the harvest. Imagine walking into your garden later in the season. Instead of seeing stressed plants and cracked fruit everywhere, you see healthy green foliage. You see clusters of tomatoes hanging from strong stems. Some are still green. Others are beginning to change color. And beneath the plants, the soil is cool and protected by mulch. You reach down and check the moisture. It's not soaked. It's not bone dry. It's just right. That's the goal. Not perfection. Balance. A healthy root zone supporting a healthy plant, and a healthy plant giving you the harvest you worked for. Final tomato watering checklist. Before you walk away from today's video, let's quickly review. First, check the soil before watering. Second, don't rely only on the appearance of the surface. Third, water deeply enough to reach the root zone. Fourth, avoid shallow watering that only wets the top layer. Fifth, direct water toward the soil instead of regularly soaking the foliage. Sixth, water in the morning when practical. Seventh, use mulch to help conserve soil moisture. Eighth, adjust your routine during heat waves and rainy periods. Ninth, remember that container tomatoes can dry out faster. And 10th, don't confuse a stressed plant with a thirsty plant without checking the soil first. These simple habits can help you avoid many of the problems associated with inconsistent watering. The biggest lesson here. The biggest lesson is that watering isn't about how much water you give your tomatoes. It's about how consistently the roots can access the right amount of moisture. That's a completely different way of thinking. Instead of asking, how often should I water my tomatoes, ask, what is happening in the soil around my tomato roots? That question leads you toward better decisions. Because the answer changes. It changes with the weather. It changes with the soil. It changes with the plant. It changes with the season, and it changes as your tomato goes from a small transplant to a large fruit-producing plant. Your garden is your best teacher. The more you garden, the more you realize that gardening isn't about memorizing hundreds of rules. It's about learning how to observe. Look at your plants. Touch the soil. Watch the weather. Notice how quickly your beds dry. Pay attention to what happens after rain. Watch how your tomatoes respond. Then make small adjustments. That is how you become a better gardener, and that's exactly what we want here at Fresh Homegrown Harvest. We don't just want to tell you what to do, we want to help you understand why you're doing it. Because once you understand the reason behind a gardening practice, you can adapt it to almost any garden. So, if your tomato plants aren't performing the way you hoped, don't immediately buy another fertilizer. Don't immediately blame the variety, and don't assume you need a complicated gardening system. Start with the basics. Check the roots. Check the soil. Check the moisture. Check the drainage, and look at your watering routine. You may discover that the biggest problem in your tomato garden isn't something you're failing to give the plants. It might be something you're giving them too often. Water is essential, but more isn't always better. Consistency is better. Healthy roots are better. Good drainage is better. And understanding your garden is better. So the next time you pick up that watering can or turn on the hose, pause for just a moment. Look at the soil. Ask yourself whether the plant actually needs water. Then, when it does, give it a thorough drink and let the soil do its job. That simple habit can help your tomato plants stay stronger, healthier, and more productive throughout the growing season. And who knows, that small change in how you water today could be the difference between simply growing tomatoes and bringing home a harvest you're genuinely proud of. Remember, the goal isn't to keep your tomato plants wet, the goal is to keep their roots healthy. Healthy roots support healthy plants. Healthy plants support flowers. Healthy flowers become fruit. And healthy fruit becomes the harvest that makes all those mornings, evenings, watering sessions, pruning sessions, and garden walks worth it. So don't let a simple watering mistake quietly steal the tomatoes you've worked so hard to grow. Water with intention. Observe your soil. Protect your roots. Use mulch. Adjust to the weather and let your garden teach you what it needs. If this video helped you look at tomato watering differently, make sure you subscribe to Fresh Homegrown Harvest for more practical gardening tips, growing techniques, harvest ideas, and simple ways to get more from your garden. And tell us in the comments, what is the biggest tomato watering problem you've experienced? Cracked tomatoes, wilting plants, yellow leaves, or something else? Your experience could help another gardener avoid the same mistake. Until next time, keep growing, keep learning, and keep bringing that fresh harvest home. This is Fresh Homegrown Harvest, where every garden has the potential to feed your table.